Welcome! Today we're going to talk about how to bring items into the small chamber in an MBraun glove box. You'll notice we always have the small chamber on vacuum, so that means that the valve is to the right and it's on dynamic vacuum. The first step is always to check the logbook. So on our logbook we note the date, the time that vacuum was pulled, whether we went in or out of the chamber, whether we used the small or the large chamber, the initials of the person who did it, and then tick marks for how many backfills have been completed. Before you use the small chamber, it's always really important to see what the last thing was that happened. So if the last thing that happened is in and the sign is on empty, then you know that you can use the chamber and it's ready to go. If the last thing was in and the sign is on in use, then you would have to check the number of backfills that have been completed, but it means that something is in the chamber and that you'll need to complete the backfill cycle before you use the chamber, and you'll need to bring the items in. If the last thing was out and it's been within the last day, then you have to make sure that 3 backfills have been completed before you add anything else. If the last thing was out and it was yesterday, then you're ready to go. To open the door from the outside, we're first going to turn the chamber to closed, which is the vertical position. Then we will turn it slightly to the left, which is the fill position, and you'll notice that the pressure gauge dial goes to the right, and once it hits 0 at the end, you set the valve to vertical again, at which point the chamber is isolated from the box, and you can then open the outer door. The outer door opens by twisting the black valve and then also turning the gray door. Once you have put your item into the chamber, you put the door back on, making sure to turn the gray in the notches and then tighten the black only just until it's tight, at which point you can turn the dial from vertical to the right to evacuate the chamber, and you'll notice that the pressure gauge dial decreases and goes down. Then you flip the sign to in use so that people know that the chamber is in use. At this point, you fill in the logbook. You include the date, the time you pulled vacuum, that you're going in the small chamber, and your initials. Now we have to wait for the full cycle. Our full cycle is a minimum of 15 minutes with 3 backfills. So usually we do a backfill approximately every 5 minutes. To do a backfill, you slowly turn the dial vertical and then to the fill position slightly to the left, and you fill it until the pressure gauge goes up about 1/4 of the way. Then you turn the dial back to evacuate such that it is always on dynamic vacuum. The reason for doing this is we don't have a perfect vacuum, so if you think about it, every time we pull vacuum, let's say we only get 90%, then the first time there would still be 10% air left. If we do a slight backfill, now we backfill with some more inert gas, in our case dinitrogen, and then when we pull vacuum, that last 10% will have some of that nitrogen. Doing this 3 times allows us to pretty much get rid of all the oxygen that would be present. Every time you do a backfill, you put a tick on the sign-in sheet, and when you've completed 3 backfills and a minimum of 15 minutes total, then you may bring the item into the box. Anytime we want to open doors, we have to make sure that the valve is vertical or in the closed position. So to bring an item into the box, we will turn the dial from evacuate, slightly filling until we hit the top of the dial, at which point we turn the valve to closed, and then we can open the inner door in the same way we had originally opened the outer door. Before you go into the glove box to open the inside door, be sure to remove your lab coat so that we don't end up with cross-contamination on the glove box gloves. When you open the inner door, it's always a good idea to keep an eye on the oxygen monitor in the box. Oftentimes using chambers is when oxygen gets introduced into glove boxes, so it's always important to keep an eye on it to make sure that everything is going correctly. Once you've brought your item into the glove box, you'll want to close the door again. You do this by lining up the notches on the silver part of the door and turning that a bit, followed by tightening the black knob just until it's finger tight. I always like to run my hand around the outside after I've done this to ensure that the door is really closed. if the notches didn't catch, that's a very common error in closing this glove box door. You'll actually feel those notches when you run your hand around, and then you can fix it and close the door. Then you can turn the sign back to empty and turn the dial into the evacuate position so that we always leave it under dynamic vacuum. Thanks for listening.